two real different styles of speaking. There's abstract and theoretical, and there's visual, specific, and anecdotal. And I'm always trying to get people to lean much more heavily into the visual, the specific, and the anecdotal, because that's what engages people. When you speak abstractly and theoretically, it's pictureless. And we are visual human beings. We have this movie reel spinning in our heads at all times, and we crave imagery. And if the speaker doesn't give me, the audience member, imagery to work with, that movie reel keeps spinning in my head, only now it's spinning with the images I've created. And that's what daydreaming is.
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leadership. In this episode, we'll explore the art of communication, storytelling, and the tools that make ideas unforgettable. My guest is someone who's literally written the book on how to command attention and leave a positive, lasting impression. Bill McGowan, an Emmy award-winning TV journalist and best-selling author, is a top communications advisor to leading names in business, tech, entertainment, sports, and finance. Bill has coached the founders of Amazon, Meta, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Spotify, Snapchat, and Airbnb, as well as Oscar, Emmy, and Grammy winners, and World Series, Super Bowl, and Olympic champions. His newest book is titled Speak Memorably, The Art of Captivating an Audience. Whether you're giving a TED Talk, speaking at the local Rotary Club, or just trying not to lose people in your Monday morning staff meeting, this conversation promises to be packed with insight that will boost your communication mojo. Bill, welcome to Leadership.
Roger, thanks for having me on.
Tell us, if you would, how did your time as a TV journalist influence your approach to public speaking?
When you tell stories on TV, Roger, every second counts in terms of keeping people's attention, because it's too easy to just channel surf and go somewhere else. And so I learned in TV how to tell an engaging story in 60 seconds, in 90 seconds. And when I was a producer at 2020 at ABC, you would produce these 10, 12-minute stories, and then the following day you'd get called into the executive producer's office, and what they presented you with was something called the minute-to-minute ratings. And what it showed you was what the fluctuation in viewership was throughout the 10 or 12 minutes of your story. And so they were able to Monday morning quarterback and show you, see where you introduced that character at the 4-minute mark, you lost people there. Or you just gave us too many statistics, too much data at 6 minutes, and you lost people there. But this is clearly what piqued people's interest, and your viewership boosted there. It was a really interesting dissecting of what it is that grips people and what makes people drift.
Well, I can see how that kind of data was invaluable.
Oh my gosh, it totally influenced the way you'd produce a story, the way you tell a story. It was an incredible learning experience.
What was the moment you realized you wanted to help others become better communicators?
I was producing a video for a woman who founded a company. It was a job search website. This was back in the dot-com boom around the beginning of the millennium. And the idea was I was going to shoot and produce a 3-4 minute branding video for her that she could bring out to venture capitalists and really summarize what the purpose of her company was and why it was a worthy investment. And so I sat down to interview her because I needed some sound bites for the video. And when it was over, she said, "Hey, would you mind if I see how I did. And I'd never been asked that before. And I thought, all right, it's going to take us 15 minutes. We have to set up a monitor and, arrange everything.
Right.
But we did. And we're watching the video together. And I just instinctively started saying to her, you probably don't want to start an answer like that. Well, what would you think if we did this instead? Or here's what I think could make a really compelling soundbite here. And about 3 or 4 minutes into that, she turned to me and said, this is what you should be doing. I mean, listen, the production is great and I really need it, but there's a real need for this and you're really good at it. So it turned out that there was someone in the room who had put us together in the first place, and she happened to be at a cocktail party later that week, and someone from Real Simple magazine at Time Inc. said, hey, listen, we had to get rid of our media trainer. Anybody know a good media trainer? And she said, yeah, I know somebody.
Yeah. So in fact, he just started the business.
That's right. So my first client was Real Simple magazine.
Interesting. That wouldn't have happened possibly, at least at that point, had she not asked the question and wanted to see how she did.
It certainly wouldn't have dawned on me.
I assume you did a retake after you had coached her.
Yes, we did.
Good.
And
good.
she saw the dramatic difference from take 1 to take 2. And that's what is the most rewarding aspect of the work I do in the company that I founded, Clarity Media Group, is that people really do see the needle move dramatically from take 1 to take 2, because the constructive feedback and the collaborative refining of the narrative really makes a difference when you do it next time.
Sure. So what does it really mean to speak memorably in today's noisy world of short attention spans?
Every day, Roger, in conference rooms, in every company, all over the world, every time people open their mouth, it's an opportunity to persuade people, influence them, motivate them, inspire them, instead of just informing them. And there's no question that the opportunity to do that is being squandered every day, because people are framing their narrative in a very bland, boring, cliche way that has this conformity to it. Everybody in business feels a sense of comfort and security talking like everybody else, the same jargon, the same cliche expressions.
Corporate speak.
It's brutal. And to be memorable, you want to break out of that conformity zone. You want to be able to say things as clearly, as simply, and as concisely as possible, because I think that's what makes people seem supremely confident. It's usually the insecure person that doesn't feel like they have command of the material, who feels the need to overspeak, falling into that trap of, well, the longer I talk, the more convincing I'm going to be. And that is the exact opposite of what reality is. And what was really important to me was to identify a lot of the tools and verbal devices that really help people land a message, have it stick, and have it rattle around in people's brains for the rest of the day, for a week, or maybe even longer. One of life's great gifts is to have our words remembered and have them live on. And is there any better compliment than coming into an office? Maybe you haven't been there in 6 months or a year. Maybe it's a client, maybe it's a partner. And to have somebody come up to you and say, I'll never forget something you said to us when you were here last year. To me, that is the holy grail of communication.
For sure. So, Bill, what do you see as the most common myth that people harbor about public speaking?
Well, it is unquestionably the fallacy that you have to tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them and tell them what you told them.
We've heard that.
We've heard that a lot. And, I'm sure the folks at McKinsey did very well promoting that formula over the years, but it's a pretty tired, dusty, and dated formula. And the more routine and cliche it is, the more people tune you out. And I think one of the other watch outs is what I call signposting. Signposting is all this warning people about what you're about to do in your communication. Let's say you're standing in front of a conference room of people, and you're presenting information. You've got a deck with you. People cannot refrain from warning the audience what they're about to do. So let me talk a little bit about, or before we do that, let me take a couple steps back and give you a little context. It is maddening how much excessive teeing up people do instead of just doing it.
Right.
And in fact, when I coach people, sometimes I'll have a group of people, maybe 5 or 6 people, and they're all going to come in and have their hour of one-on-one coaching. And right at the outset, I say, all right, listen, I'm going to lay down the clarity challenge. That's what I call it. And I will buy dinner for anybody who can come in and present their deck to me and not say the words, I want to talk a little bit about blank. Dinner's on me.
Yeah.
And even with the warning, people can't do it. That's how ingrained it is.
Well, they've seen it done hundreds of times themselves.
That's right. And that negative learning through osmosis is powerful, and it's also not constructive.
Right. So what's the science behind why certain messages resonate more than others?
There is a really interesting study that we unearthed in the book that we don't call it. The study was called the primacy-recency effect. And what it showed was that what you say at the beginning of a communication opportunity and what you say at the very end is disproportionately remembered more than anything that you say in the middle. And it's really interesting because I saw an interview with Francis Ford Coppola a couple years ago, and he was being interviewed by Fareed Zakaria on CNN. And Fareed asked him, do you have a formula for making movies? And Coppola said, well, I learned from the masters in Hollywood years ago that you should identify what your 3 best things are for the movie and take your best thing and finish the movie with it. Take your second best thing and open the movie with it. And then find some logical thematic place for your third best thing somewhere in the middle. Now, he's talking about movie making, but movie making is storytelling. Getting up in front of a room and presenting information, presenting a deck to people, that's storytelling as well. Or at least everybody should think of it as storytelling. And so there is this recurrence of this wisdom that get out of the starting block strong. Don't do it with this brutal agenda slide that's got 12 items on it, and you are now going to do slide karaoke narrating every one of those 12 bullets. That's going to put people to sleep. Grip them at the top, preferably with some kind of story that is metaphorically connected to the notion of what you're there to speak about.
So if you were going to coach 4 or 5 people in a room, at the very beginning of that session, what might you say in those first 30 seconds to sort of set the tone for what's going to happen in the rest of the time you're spending with them? I
would probably tell them what I just told you. And that is, when you get in front of a room, your goal is to move people with your words. It is not just to inform them. And to do that, you have to be distinctive in how you speak. You have to be memorable in how you speak. And there's a good chance that everything that you've learned by watching other people are things that I'm going to now suggest you stay clear of.
Okay.
So that's very different than saying, So I'm Bill McGowan. I'm the CEO of Clarity Media Group, and I want to talk a little bit today about effective communication.
Snooze,
Yeah,
snooze, snooze.
wake me when it's over.
So you've used the term storytelling a
Mm.
number of times. Tell us, what role does storytelling play in making a speech or presentation memorable? What kind of stories? How should they be delivered? When should they be delivered, etc.?
Getting out of the gate with a story to me is really effective. And I've had people that I've trained say, well, the agenda slide is typically how we start. And I say, okay, listen, I understand, but let's try something different this time. And I will have a engaged conversation with them and try to be on the lookout for anecdotal material. And oftentimes I'll hear something and say, I like that. Let's start the presentation with that.
Yeah.
And so I'll give you an example, Roger. I had to give a talk in San Francisco a few years back, and I was a little bit at a loss of how I was going to start it. And I heard this interview on the radio, or maybe it was a podcast. Aaron Levy, who is the CEO of Box, the cloud storage company, he was being interviewed, and he was asked, why do you think your IPO underperformed vis-a-vis the other companies in your competitive space, like Dropbox and others? And, instead of blaming the timing of the market or a poor valuation that was assigned to Box, or maybe even suggesting that they didn't have the right financial institution leading the offering, he didn't say any of that. He said, we underperformed because we failed to come up with a narrative that fit on the back of a cocktail napkin.
Mm.
And I heard that. I thought, wow, that is incredible. That's what I'm going to lead my talk with. And I'm going to tell people I heard this really interesting interview.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now people always worry, well, isn't the audience going to be wondering, where the heck is he starting this thing? How's he going to get from point A to point F? Like, this sounds pretty random to me. That's fine. That's a form of engagement. You've got people mentally chewing on something now, trying to figure out, how are you going to tie this all together? And people enjoy doing that. So when you start with a story, you need something that connects the story from your presentation. And that's what I call the through line. The through line is the connective tissue that helps explain the relevance of the story. So for me, on that example, my through line was, until I heard that interview, I always thought that good communication was a nice thing to have. And then I realized it's an essential thing to have, right down to your P&L, that it can either make you or break you. And so that through line really does help explain why this story was important for me to tell you in the first place.
So it seems that that's a good approach, whether you are the first speaker on a program or the only speaker.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a great way to handle a disengaged or distracted audience, or prevent that audience from becoming disengaged or distracted.
Yes, I think audiences get disengaged when they hear something that sounds numbingly familiar to them.
Right.
You may be delivering information that's very different, but if it's couched and framed and packaged the exact same way as every other presenter that day, you're going to get drift.
Sure, sure.
The other great thing about storytelling, Roger, is that there are also studies that show that if you take factual information and you embed them within storytelling, that content becomes 22 times more memorable than if you just fire hose talking points and data points at people. That there's just greater retention when it's packaged that way.
Yeah. Well, I used to do workshops for years. I would do training workshops. And at the end of the first day, I would ask them the stop, start, and continue question. Is there anything you'd like for me to stop doing that I've been doing? And they typically wouldn't have anything. Is there anything you want me to start doing? And often they wouldn't have anything. And I would say, is there anything you want to make sure I continue doing? And 100% of the time, people would say, keep telling stories,
Hmm.
not just to entertain us, but tell us stories that help us learn what you're teaching us.
Yeah,
Storytelling is, I mean, it's timeless. The value of
it
it. I don't.
is.
It's amazing that people don't understand that instinctively. But
Yeah. From the time that drawings were etched on the walls of caves.
right. So in coaching business clients, how do you help them avoid corporate jargon and buzzwords?
What I often do is give them an instantaneous translation of how you could say that without any of these cliche expressions. And there are lots of them all across the value chain or as part of the broader ecosystem, or we're on a journey and we're laser focused on this is why we're drilling down and doubling down on what I really try to do is give them the very plain and simple alternative and just explain to them. Albert Einstein said it best: if you can't explain it simply enough, you don't understand it well enough.
Right.
I've had people say to me in sessions, I just worry that if I don't use all these buzzwords and all this terminology, people are going to think I don't know what I'm talking about. I said, no, it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah, they'll tune you out.
Yeah, it's exactly the opposite. It's the person who has command of the material enough to whittle it down to its bare essentials that shows the greatest command.
So in powerful communication, how important is brevity?
It goes hand in hand with, I think, what we were just talking about, Roger, and that is simplicity. I find the people who have the greatest conviction in their beliefs and demonstrate the greatest confidence are able to exercise an economy of words. They're able to say it succinctly and powerfully. They don't need volume. They don't need length to drive the point home. And this is something that's absolutely important. Usually, if you listen to very, very junior people who are just finding their way in a company, one of the biggest mistakes they make is they keep yammering on and
Just
on and on and on.
don't know when to stop.
They don't know where the period is.
Yeah.
And we know what happens when we read something in print and it's a big, long run-on sentence. You usually lose your way and you have to go back to the top and start all over again. You can't do that with audio. You can't live in front of people have somebody hit the pause button, rewind, and listen to it over again.
Yeah.
Try to get people to speak in shorter, simpler, declarative sentences. If you find yourself saying the words "and so" a lot, that typically means that you're stringing all of your thoughts together into a paragraph long thought. And that's a quick way to lose people.
Well, I'm thinking of the Gettysburg Address,
Yeah.
one of the timeless pieces of rhetoric in our history. And Lincoln was preceded on that occasion by some famous speaker whose name I can't recall, which is interesting, who spoke for 2 or 2.5 hours.
Oof. Yeah.
So which speech is timeless?
And the Gettysburg Address is a very short speech.
Oh, very, very short.
Right.
So what's the difference between being on message and being authentic?
Being on message, in my experience as a communications coach, typically means I've had a marketing or a comms team develop what it is I need to say.
Mm-hmm.
And they've created this big, long document, and they've handed me this document, and now I have to memorize it and regurgitate it back. That's on message.
Right.
And when I hear people speaking on message, it usually is abstract and theoretical. And if you think there are two real different styles of speaking, there's abstract and theoretical, and there's visual, specific, and anecdotal. And I'm always trying to get people to lean much more heavily into the visual, the specific, and the anecdotal, because that's what engages people. When you speak abstractly and theoretically, it's pictureless. And we are visual human beings. We have this movie reel spinning in our heads at all times, and we crave imagery. And if the speaker doesn't give me, the audience member, imagery to work with, that movie reel keeps spinning in my head, only now it's spinning with the images I've created. And that's what daydreaming is.
Right.
I have now created my own visual stimulation because you haven't given me any. That's why you have to ruthlessly control the film that's spooling through that movie reel in your audience's head.
What's your process, Bill, for helping someone find their distinctive voice?
This is tied to what we were just talking about, Roger, about authenticity. And it's very hard to be authentic when you are just regurgitating messaging that somebody else gave you. There's just not an ownership you're going to feel over that. And what I really recommend executives do is, in the message development stage, replicate what I do with people in sessions. And that's have a conversation with your communications person or your marketing person for 15, 20 minutes. And have them ask you a series of questions to elicit what your point of view is, and record it. Or if they're great note takers, that's fine. But ultimately, what should be documented on paper is very, very close to how it came out of your mouth in the first place.
Right. In other words, you're not performing, you're talking with someone.
That's right. And you're also not sitting down and writing it at a computer, which is a terrible way to create content that you eventually have to get up and speak. Because unless you have worked in TV or radio, typically, stylistically, you're going to write for the eye, which is longer, complex sentences with introductory phrases and parenthetical clauses.
Right.
We don't talk like that.
No.
So one exercise I give to people is, if you don't have a comms executive that you can banter with, take out your phone, make yourself an outline of what it is that you want to say. Maybe you have to get up in front of a room of people. Make yourself an outline, roll the record function on your phone. There are apps like Otter AI that will record and transcribe everything you say.
Sure.
Just get up and say it as it would naturally come to you. Don't worry if there are lots of starts and stops and mistakes. That doesn't matter at all. Then take the transcription of what you said and export that to a Word document or whatever you're working from, and make that your rough first draft. And sure, you can clean it up of all the mistakes, but stylistically, don't change it. And what that does is it captures instinctively how you intend to communicate these thoughts. It is a direct mirror reflection of that. That wouldn't happen if you sat down to write it. And it certainly is not going to happen if you rely on generative AI to create content. That is, to me, the worst possible scenario to try to be authentic.
Your change initiative has the budget. The strategy looks solid, and everyone's nodding along in the meetings. But for some reason, it's going nowhere. Dr. Roger Dean Duncan knows why. After 40 years in the trenches with top business leaders, he knows that change fails when organizations lack the right foundations: trust, accountability, and real communication. Dr. Duncan's free 10-minute assessment shows you exactly where your organization stands. Answer a few straightforward questions that reveal your true change readiness level. Don't waste months discovering the hard way. Get your free assessment today at leadershop.net/change. Again, that's leadershop.net/change.
So how do you help clients overcome their fear of public speaking? And that's a very common fear.
The first important mindset you want to get yourself into is the fact that everybody in the audience is rooting for you. Don't fall into this fallacy that they're all waiting for some catastrophe and they're waiting for you to slip up and have just this meltdown. That's not it at all. They want you to do well. They're rooting for you. They're not the opponent. And it doesn't matter if you look out into your audience and you see a sea of blank faces. That's just the way people look when they're listening to you.
Right.
But what I tell them to do is try to find one person in each quadrant of the room who falls under that category of a good listener. And a good listener is somebody who's nodding and smiling and giving you that positive affirmation that what you're saying is interesting and it's engaging. Find one of those types in each corner of the room and just play to those four people. Move your gaze around the room into all four corners. If you're intimidated by a large crowd, that's a great way of shrinking the audience down to four people.
Right.
Focusing on the fact that, oh my God, there are like 250 people in here. And those people smiling and nodding are going to boost your confidence through it. I know that if I look out into the audience randomly and I see somebody, banging away with their thumbs on their phone, that's a confidence killer for me.
Sure. So in what ways has the rise of remote work and virtual meetings affected the way people communicate?
It's made it even more difficult to keep people's attention. That's for sure. I know the sessions that I do that are typically 4 hours long in person, 2 hours is the absolute maximum. And there are lots of different things happening in those 2 hours, but there is something that is called Zoom fatigue that is real.
Yes.
I think we've all experienced it, but there's also an interesting phenomenon that I write about that I call Zoomnesia, which is the fact that it's much harder to recall details of a meeting that you had Thursday on Zoom from a meeting you had Monday on Zoom. And I discovered this during the pandemic, where I normally have a really vivid memory of what happens in these training sessions. And I realized that my recall from one session to another was starting to meld together in my mind. And I was having a harder time distinguishing one session from another. And then I realized, well, of course, the setting you have for every single one of these meetings is exactly the same. You're sitting in exactly the same chair. You're staring into exactly the same computer screen. There are no contextual clues. Somebody's office or the view out the window when you went to that client on Monday. There's nothing differentiating any of these things. And from that point on, I started taking very detailed notes through all of these training sessions. Of course, now everything from Zoom to other platforms allow you to record these calls. There's also an AI assistant that will summarize the call for you. So it's becoming less of an issue.
What's your advice for standing out in a crowded digital space?
I would recommend that you have a keen awareness of what each digital platform wants you to do. There's a huge difference that I'm working within right now as I try to share informational videos. There's a huge difference in posting something on Instagram and posting something on LinkedIn. And
sure,
it's a big mistake to try to think that one size fits all. It doesn't. On LinkedIn, people want a bit more content. They want a bit more learning that should take place. On Instagram, on TikTok, it's about hitting the point and getting out. So just your total running time is going to be very different among those different platforms. But, it gets back to that point, Roger, we were talking about earlier about empathy. Try to really understand, what do people need to hear from me? What natural curiosities or questions do they have that I can directly answer? How can I get my finger on their pulse and provide something that's really valuable to them? It's not about you. It's about them.
Right.
And never losing sight of that.
How can someone prepare for a high stakes media interview? You've been on both sides of the microphone. When you're coaching someone who's, say it's a senior executive of a big company, and that person's going to be interviewed by somebody from the media, and it's an important issue, how do you prepare that person?
We have a proprietary method that we use, and while I visually can't show it to you, it really is predicated on the belief that good answers have two components. What's the point I'm trying to make here? But then what material do I have to support that point in a visual, specific, anecdotal way? It's not, men and women do not live by talking point alone.
Right.
You need material that helps persuade people that your point is valid. So storytelling or data or examples, whatever it may be. And then ask yourself, not what's every single possible question I could be asked. That is a sucker's game, because what you're going to end up with is, in my mind, one of the worst preparatory tools on the planet that is still very prominent. And that is the dreaded suggested Q&A document that is usually developed for executives. That's about 7 pages long. It's got about 68 different questions on it. It falls into that trap we were talking about earlier about somebody else has not only scripted the questions in a predictive way, which may not be at all the way they get asked in real life,
Right.
but they've also scripted your answers. That I have seen many, many executives be handed that and it go right in the circular file, right in the wastebasket. Because when you inundate executives with too much, they're just going to throw their hands up in the air and give up. So our method is, don't think about every variable of question. What are the 6, 8, 10 topics that you're likely to have to answer or address in this interview? It could be something as basic as, tell me your role. Tell me what the purpose is. Tell me what's distinctive about you vis-a-vis competitive companies. What are your growth plans? What are your future plans? What's your culture like? I mean, everybody gets asked questions in somewhat of a predictable, narrow range. And then what I always tell people is, be aware of what's trending in the news cycle. If there's a big hot story that is even tangentially related to you or your business, that's fair game. You could be asked that question. If you're the CEO of United Airlines and there's a viral video trending of some incident that happened on a Delta flight and you're going on Bloomberg that afternoon, you better believe they're going to ask you, what would you have done if that had been on your airline?
Sure. Well, and of course, United has had some of its own issues.
Yes, it has. Mm-hmm.
So give us an example, if you will, of a public speaker or figure who spoke memorably, somebody recently.
I'm a huge fan of Angela Duckworth,
Yes.
the author of Grit. And Angela gave a commencement address at Bates College in Maine. And I loved it. It was just so incredibly well done.
It's probably on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. Everybody should go see it. And if you haven't read her book, Grit, it's one of the all-time greats. And she started the speech by asking the president of the college to hold her phone for her. And then she went back to the podium. He was sitting behind her. And then she turned around and went back to the podium. And very cleverly, she said, "Oh, wait a minute. Do me a favor. Give me your phone." Like she took his phone from him. And everybody in the audience is probably thinking, what's going on here? And so the whole point of the speech was about how we are not living in the moment. We are, glued to these devices that
Right.
are making us anxious. And it was a fantastic speech with a lot of fascinating data. And But before she got going, she not only swapped phones with the president of the college, she asked everybody in the audience to hand their phone to the person next to them. You know, don't worry, it's just 15 minutes. You won't get the shakes, I promise you. And it was just a fantastic speech.
Isn't it amazing that we live in a world where you would have a few hundred people at an event like that, and most of them would have had a phone with them? That's mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling.
Well, getting back to the preparation for a good media interview, you and I both have seen people who are really good at answering the unasked question.
Mm-hmm.
There are things they want to say, and they will politely address very briefly, if at all, the question that was asked, and then they will pivot to answering the question they really want to talk about. How do you view that particular practice?
It has to be very organic, and it has to sound very natural.
Right.
The least natural version of that is, well, Roger, I'm really not here to talk about that here today. What I am here to talk about, that is about as bad as it gets.
Yeah.
And, I show clients examples of people doing this well. Whether it's Bob Iger or Tim Cook or anybody else, they have a tendency right at the beginning of the answer to say, well, let me give you a sense of how I'm looking at this right now. That is the first sentence out of their mouth. And it could be in the face of a very insinuating, accusatory question.
Right.
And that immediately gets them off the hook of answering the question. I do feel as though there is this misconception that media training is designed to get you to never answer the question. And in fact, when I work with people, I say, oh, have you been media trained before? Yeah. I say, well, what was the biggest takeaway you had from your previous session? Don't answer the question. It's like, wrong answer.
Yeah.
The likelihood is if you're an executive and you're going on Bloomberg, CNBC, whatever it is, 75% of the questions you get are probably going to be pretty straightforward. They're not going to be gotcha questions. And in that situation, look for a way to answer the question, even if you want to move the conversation to something that matters to you. That means only 25% of the time are you going to have to use deflective devices to maybe not commit to an answer that you don't want to commit to.
How has your own communication style evolved over the years?
It's definitely gotten more concise. I don't think people can probably ever arrive at this destination where they say, I'm as brief as I want to be. It's a constant quest to be more succinct, because in my previous book, I had this chapter called the pasta sauce principle. And I equated speaking with making a pasta sauce on a Sunday. If you put a pot up of tomato sauce and you cook that down for about 3 hours, what you get is something half the volume, but a lot more flavorful. But it takes time to get that reduction going.
Right.
And the same is true for speaking.
That's a great metaphor.
Thank you. If you put the time in ahead of time, instead of winging it is one of the biggest invitations to droning on and on and on.
Exactly.
It's the Woodrow Wilson quote. If you want me to speak for 3 minutes, I'll need 2 weeks to prepare. If you need me to speak for 10 minutes, I'll need a few days. But if you need me to speak for an hour, I can go right now.
Right. And some people can.
And some people can, right. So the thing is that you want to get your verbal volume down by about 50%, because that's what gives it flavor and punch.
Bill, what is a book or a quote or a mentor that shaped your approach to communication?
I love the quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that says, you should do one thing every day that scares you.
Sounds like Evel Knievel.
Yeah, right. Fortunately, you're not jumping over 150 barrels.
Yeah.
But I love that quote in the context of public speaking, because it is very easy for us to all retreat into this conformity zone where we are speaking exactly like all the other people that we've listened to. And I challenge the people I work with, and I challenge the people who are going to speak memorably. I challenge them to just experiment, do something different. It doesn't have to be something that you conjured up all by yourself. Maybe you saw somebody give a speech or a presentation and they did something that was very different or unorthodox. And you realize, wow, that person's communication style is not unlike mine. Let me try that next time I go out. It doesn't mean you have to radically transform the way you speak all at once. It does mean try something different. Try something that maybe you don't feel supremely confident in, but just rehearse it over and over and over again so it's not foreign and unfamiliar to you. If you're not a storyteller, try to be on the lookout for a story you can lead a talk with. If you're not comfortable using humor, try to just see one thing in your presentation through a slightly humorous lens. There are lots of different things you can experiment with.
As you talk, I'm reminded of my father, not because you remind me of my father, but some of the things you've said. My dad was a wonderful public speaker, and he told me one time, it's okay to have butterflies. You just train them to fly in formation.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
In other words, you think through what you're going to say and why you're going to say it, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest trap people fall into is when they start to get good at public speaking. The better you get, the more likely you are to shirk the prep.
Right.
And I know from experience, having had the privilege of working with some people as clients who many would consider some of the best public speakers out there, they are relentless preparers. They are relentless in their rehearsing. They are not mailing it in. They are not kidding themselves. Oh, I got this. I do this all the time. It's like falling off a log for me. They never, ever con themselves into thinking that.
Yeah, that's very smart. So, Bill, if you could give one piece of communication advice to an aspiring leader or a young entrepreneur, what would it be?
My advice would be to carry around with you at all times either your phone or a moleskin or some device that allows you to take notes, and be in constant, what I call anecdote acquisition mode.
Yes.
Have your eyes and ears open to things that fascinate you, that seemed counterintuitive or unexpected, things that represent potentially really great storytelling material. And the minute you have exposure to that, write it down, because otherwise you're going to forget it. And that developing almost this vault of stories, all different stories could potentially relate to different kinds of situations in business, and start amassing those things, because that is the gold of the media interviews you're going to give, the keynotes you're going to present, the fireside chats that you're going to be participating in. That's the fuel in the engine that people pay attention to and people remember.
And good speakers are comfortable telling stories.
They certainly are. And they also don't fall victim to the trap of, oh, well, I told that story last time. I can't tell that again. That is the intelligent person's trap. They feel like it's cheesy if they borrow from themselves and repurpose a story. No, absolutely not. When you get great content, get some mileage out of it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Bill. The tips you've offered our listeners can apply in virtually every communication situation I can imagine. It's been a pleasure having you as our guest on Leadership. For those of you who'd like to dig even deeper into Bill's coaching, be sure to check out his new book. It's titled Speak Memorably, The Art of Captivating an Audience. And to grab a free copy of my best-selling book, Change Friendly Leadership, go to changefriendly.com. That's changefriendly.com. In other episodes of Leadership, I share my exclusive conversations with top thought leaders who offer smart tips to boost your effectiveness in both your professional and personal life. My guests include superstars like Stephen M.R. Covey, Liz Wiseman, Doug Conant, Dory Clark, Heather Younger, Marshall Goldsmith, Bill George, Jessica Chin, Guy Kawasaki, Dana Perino, Amy Edmondson, David Ulrich, Pat Flynn, and many others who have insightful things to say that can help you turn ideas into breakthroughs. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can stay informed on what's coming your way. Trust me, folks, you don't want to miss any of our episodes. When you subscribe, you'll also receive regular doses of high-value written content. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, speak clearly, speak boldly, and speak memorably. For Leadership, I'm Roger Dean Duncan.